Jessica Manfre is a little ashamed to admit it, but when she went on her first date with her husband, future husband, she didn't even know what the Coast Guard was. A bit embarrassing, considering that the man she'd soon marry was enlisted in its ranks. Well, since then, she's learned plenty about the Coast Guard, although nothing could have prepared her for the role of being a military wife.
Jessica Manfre is a licensed social worker and the proud wife of a U.S. Coast Guardsman. She's also the co-founder of Inspire Up, a nonprofit serving military and first responders. With candid vulnerability, Jessica shares the loneliness and craving for connection, which are part of being a military spouse. In Never Alone, Jessica compares the struggles of military spouses to those of Ruth in the Old Testament and tells how she found hope and help in Ruth's example.
Well, Jessica Manfre is here with us now. And Jessica, we welcome you to the 700 Club. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
In your book, Never Alone, you liken Ruth, from the book of Ruth, to a modern-day military spouse. Until I read it, I didn't understand. I thought, what is that? Talk a little bit about why.
I didn't understand it. And that is the truth. I knew I was going to write about loneliness. I knew the structure of what I wanted, how I wanted to tell the story. And then I was like, okay, what scripture am I going to bring into this? And it was literally me, a cup of coffee, and Ruth.
Wow.
I read Where You Go, I Go, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is it.
Yeah, yeah. You talk so much about maybe the key thing about being a military wife, which is loneliness. I mean, how big an issue is that? Is that an every military wife issue? What do you think?
I think it's something that touches all of us. We weren't meant to live this life alone. We were meant to have community and have each other. And when you are taken from that over and over again, every 2 to 3 years, which is the typical move cycle for us, it is rough. And I think the whole world got a taste of it during the pandemic, that isolation, not able to spend holidays with our families. And so it was really during that time that I knew this book needed to be out in the world, really.
When you first marry, everybody's gaga when they first marry. Well, when you're a military wife, in short order, often, your spouse is sent off on some kind of deployment. What was the first year for you like?
Oh my goodness. So I always joke that God eased me into military life because I moved from one coast of Florida to the other, right? I was still going home once a month and, we were married, and then he got orders to Alaska. And I was like, okay, God,
were you going with him?
Yes. And it was like, okay, I'm going to take this. This is going to be an adventure, which it was, but I was 22 years old.
Yeah.
What did I know? How did I know? We had to grow together.
Figure out how to be a wife at that point, period, minus the military part of it.
Yeah.
A grown-up, yes.
Completely.
Yeah.
But it was a blessing in disguise. We needed that challenge.
Yeah.
We needed to weather that. It was a rough year. And then we landed, back on, the other side in Virginia and, had our son a few years later. And it was just, I'm so glad that I had that season, even though it was hard.
Well, the hard places are the places that we grow. But, oh, my, when loneliness is involved, it can be such a lesson. You talk about the different types of loneliness in your book. Will you share those with us?
Absolutely. People, when they think of being lonely, they just think of no one around, right? But it's so much more than that. It's situational, it's emotional, it's environmental. If you just look at a person who is experiencing mental health crisis, do they have a support group? Are they isolating? Do they have people around them that they can go to? If they don't, that's a precursor for all the things that can follow. When we look at suicide rates and things like that, they're lonely. They're very lonely. If you talk about the military specifically and our transitioning veterans, we are finding more and more that loss of camaraderie is like the first step in the downward spiral. So.
Well, and if you're a person who is a people person and you have a very outgoing personality, you might be able to find connections for yourself. But if you're a shy person or a little more introverted, that's got to be difficult.
Very. I ride the line. I am a therapist. I love people. I love hearing their stories, but I also need to recharge too, right? And so how do you do that? Well, we have technology now.
Yes.
Utilize, your Facebook groups, the different moms groups, whatever it is. There's someone out there just like you struggling that needs that connection,
Is there something at bases or military areas or regions that the military does to kind of bring wives or husbands nowadays together?
Yeah, every branch of service has their own, program. The Coast Guard, kind of falls in line with the Navy. It's MWR. We have FRGs, family resource groups. Their whole goal is to be that, stand in the gap, where that is. You're moving to a new place. You don't know what doctors to bring your children to, what groups are available. How do you socialize your family? They're there for you. And then you have spouses who raise their hand and say, I'm going to be that leader for you. So you'll have an ombudsman or a key spouse, someone that is donating their time, to be that connector.
How does the book of Ruth address pushing back loneliness? Because you kind of have to take a, I'm going to do something about this attitude, or you just kind of wallow in it.
Completely. So I think Ruth is a wonderful story for us to unpack. And, a lot of people like to, focus on the New Testament, which is beautiful. We know why, right?
Yes.
But Ruth, Naomi left a famine. She lost her husband. She lost her sons. She's looking to, push her daughters-in-law to stay and go off on her own. She's bitter at everything. Mm-hmm. She's lonely. And Ruth says, no. And when I look at the spouse relationships that I have, the friendships that I have, they are my Ruths.
Yes.
They hold that faith, they hold that foundation. There's so much in that story.
Yeah. One of the things I've always admired about military spouses is you hold down the fort, sometimes for a long time, depending on the length of a deployment. And so you're the chief operating officer, and then the spouse comes home and needs to integrate into that, which means you then have to let go of some of what's been working. How do you manage that?
It is rough. It is very rough. The first couple of deployments that we had, we didn't have children. He was in and out on a patrol boat, and so it was fine. I was
a little different. Yeah,
I'm responsible for myself. But when he was on the Resolute out of St. Petersburg, he would be gone 2 months, home 2 months. So it was just a lot. Our son was 3.5. Yeah. He potty trained before my husband left on his first deployment and then regressed.
Oh, wow.
Because dad's gone. He's never lived his life without his father. It was rough. And then we had to change things. I had to make things work. I was working at the time. He was going to preschool. And then my husband came home, and I'm like, what are you doing? That's not how we do this. Yes. And so we had to have a sit down.
Oh, mercy.
And have those conversations and find out what works,
Yeah, it's so easy to say you can manage it ahead of time. Mm-hmm. Walking through it is like a minefield, really.
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that's why you wrote the book.
A little bit.
Yes. Yeah. And so I just want to say, of course, we live in a military area here, so I speak to all of you who are in the Tidewater area, but to all of you across the country who find yourselves in this scenario, Jessica's book is called Never Alone, with the modern military spouse and the God who does with us. Yeah, if you want to get a hold of this, who goes with us. It's available nationwide, so look for the book. Thank you. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the time. Mm-hmm.